Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and with me, the man who's always existing in the phenomenal and even the existential field, Mr. Ken Kelly. How's the existential field today, Ken?
It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenology in the existential field. I'm in both two fields at one time. Can you believe it? Well, this is a special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. So what does special edition mean? Well, it means we put out a weekly podcast during United Kingdom academic term time. But when there's a break in term time and everyone's enjoying a holiday, Rory and I like to delve into a specific subject, maybe get in touch with an expert and bring you a deep dive onto that. And today we're going to be looking at autism.
We are, and we're very, very fortunate because someone on our Facebook group put a call out. And if you're wondering what our Facebook group is, if you type in Counselling Tutor into Facebook, you'll see our group. It's a closed group. Knock on the door. We'll let you in. Over 20,000 like-minded people, students of counselling and psychotherapy, qualified colleagues, supervisors, there's some lecturers in there as well, all talking about counselling training, the topics that come up in counselling training. So do join us. And within that group, someone posted about getting an insight on working with someone who has autism. And we're very grateful to Angela Maughan, who agreed to be interviewed. Angela herself has autism, but she's speaking about her experience as a client, some real valuable information in that interview, which will I'm convinced will help anyone who's working with a client who has autism. Of course, everybody's different, but I think the observations in this interview are going to be really, really useful. And I've got a handout, of course, where I'm going to be just highlighting some areas that may be really useful for those who may have a client with autism.
Without any further ado, let's get into that deep dive on autism with Angela and Rory after this short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
So, hello to Angela Maughan. Is that how your name's pronounced? Maughan, is that right?
It's Maughan.
Maughan, there we go.
Yes.
It's my flat Manchester vowels, you see. So, first of all, thank you very, very much for agreeing to be interviewed. And I'm sure that the interview is going to be a great benefit for not only the people who listen, counsellors, but also, I think, for those people for those clients of counsellors who may be autistic. Yeah. So I think that leads me to the first question. What is the correct way to address someone with autism?
As in what?
As in, would you say you're autistic, you have autism?
Ah, right.
Yes.
That's a good question. Every autistic person identifies themselves a little bit different. Some people like to say, I am autistic.
Right.
Some people might say, I have autism. It's important. I think it would be important when you're working with somebody to identify how they're like it, because it can often end up being a bit of a barrier if you just say, are you autistic? And because they have their own way of, we all do. We like to identify in our own way as an individual.
Yes.
And it's quite common that people just categorize and things like that. So, but yeah, it is down to the individual. Myself, I am Angela and I have autism, but I do know a lot of other people who just call themselves autistic.
So you would say that's quite important right at the beginning of the relationship to make that distinction. Maybe if someone disclosed, and that would help build a relationship, help build trust. Do you think? I
think it is vital to build a rapport at the very beginning. And it's all like everything that they need really, and how they like to be addressed. It's all important to like keep them barriers open so they'll keep on communicating the best they can.
Yeah, because we've got to be careful of not labelling people and seeing just a name, because you are Angela. Yeah, there's a lot more to you than just that label, isn't there?
Yeah,
so,
for me personally,
for you personally, yeah. I'm sure it might be different for other people who have
definitely.
autism, but for you, yes. So tell me a little bit about yourself. You very kindly wrote a little kind of introduction. So just share with the audience just a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Angela Maughan. I am autistic. I got diagnosed in my early 30s. I spent a long time before that in and out of the mental health sector, counselling, CPNs, things like that. I have a son who is also autistic. I'm currently currently training to be a counsellor through Time Met at the moment. And my whole aim is to actually become a counsellor for autistic teenagers and adults. I run a support group based in Gateshead for autistic adults to come along. It's about empowering them. It's all peer support, so it's just getting them out in the community or doing little activities, anything to kind of give them a bit of like oomph sort of thing, like, and give them some power back. And I basically, that's about it really. But at the moment, I'm just continuously studying, and I just really want to try and make a difference. So I just thought I'd like contact you to see if you were interested in kind of covering this subject.
Yeah, and it was something that's come up in our Facebook group a lot, I have to say. And I'd also say that one of the difficulties that people had was they really had very little understanding. So what we did is I asked people to ask questions in the Facebook group, and then quite simply, I forwarded the questions onto you, and you picked, I think it was 10, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So the first question is, what do they wish? I'll say, what do you wish that people understood about your condition? That's the first question.
It is, first and foremost, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. This common thing occurs where you hear phrases like, oh, we're all a little bit autistic and things like that. And that is a complete barrier against everyone. It's not the case. It is a developmental disorder, which means our brains are essentially wired differently. And it can be extremely stressful getting through a day. Things that I like to say, I'll say neurotypical people, as like yourselves, consider things as being normal and easy to do, like making a cup of tea and things like that. We would find extremely overwhelming because we're constantly thinking what we have to do this task, and then there's other anxieties around that. And then we also have problems with our executive functioning and our cognitive functioning, and so it can end up making us forget things. We might burn food, we might have accidents. It's a very, very stressful thing to go through every day. And then also there's another thing where, like, I think people sometimes have this misconception that people who are, I don't know how to like word it correctly, but you could say high functioning or Asperger's, whichever diagnosis a person has, suffers less of the symptoms than what someone lower down on the spectrum may. But it's not the case. It's just that we have a whole range of like issues ourselves, but we mask them. We put this face on, we get through the day, we come home, and it's like it breaks you. You shut down. You could have meltdowns, but we tend to keep it behind closed doors, and it's hard. It's hard getting through a day and trying to fit into society. And I don't think people actually realise, because I had it said that to us recently, where I wouldn't have thought you were autistic, and that's because I put so much effort in.
Yes.
So much effort in when I'm interacting.
Yes, I have a friend who is Aspergic, and he identifies as Aspergic, and that would absolutely match his experience of life. Which kind of brings me on to the second question, which is, had you approached a counsellor because of your autism or issues related to symptoms of autism, or was it something completely different?
Well, prior to my diagnosis, I was obviously approaching a counsellor because I got batched with loads of different labels. Oh, you're this, you're that, you're bipolar, you're this, and then you take them away from us again and give us a different one, because I never quite fit anything. I almost did, but I didn't. And I had anxiety and low self-esteem, but that is all things that coincide as a comorbidity with autism. So it's all part of autism because we are autistic. So this is who we are.
Yes.
And which means the symptoms and all the other different issues is ultimately part of us. So it is all part of being autistic and the comorbidities that come along with it.
Yes, when you talk about the comorbidities, I'm presuming that's the other kind of difficulties or feelings or emotions or what, I guess.
All right. Basically, people with autism, they tend to have the most susceptible. There's not loads of research. There is in some departments, but not others. But you notice there's been research done. There's high amounts of people that have certain disorders that run alongside. Epilepsy is a very common one. ADHD, ADD, OCD, the pathological demand avoidance, for PTSD, because even just as what might not be a trauma to a neurotypical person could be to an autistic person due to sensory overloads and things like that. But there's lots of disorders like that which are mental health based as well. Quite a lot of them are known as comorbidities.
Yes. So it sounds to me like it would be useful to understand that the person who's in front of you may have other presenting issues that are part of being autistic.
It's not just mental neither, it's also physical, because some people have chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, because the stress on the body takes its toll over the years. And then it's quite often the later in life autistic people become exhausted and the bodies become exhausted. And it is just hard to keep functioning. So, for instance, when you've got a client in there, they could be in a considerable amount of pain that day if they're hypersensitive to the pain, but they might not be able to tell you that. And it's just always good to be aware that there might be something else going on as well. Right.
I mean, I think that's really, really useful, that notion that someone, because as you said earlier, you said that I'll speak about you because you can't speak for all autistic people.
I can't, no.
But you were saying that sometimes you, in a neurotypical world, you had to present as neurotypical. So yes. Perhaps people wouldn't appreciate that you may be in pain or maybe fatigued or maybe overloaded.
Yeah. Myself, I have epilepsy, I have fibromyalgia, I get really bad migraines, I've got PTSD. I have a whole range myself. Right. But it, like I say, nobody really notices, but they all will now.
Yes, I guess so, yes. So, I mean, I think that question leads nicely on to the next one, which is, were you truly able to connect with the therapist, or were there any barriers from either of them? I guess there's two therapists maybe, and could you identify them? So did you find any barriers, and could you connect to your therapists?
I have, yes. I've had quite a few. I've experienced some frustration from therapists before, especially during CBT and things like that, because a lot of us struggle to understand our own emotions. We don't know them. Some of us can't even name them.
Yes.
And that is, look, when you go through the CBT process and the ABC model, we look we get frustrated, and I've come across as being really anxious and a bit angsty and not very nice because I'm getting in a state. And then I look as though I'm being non-compliant or I don't want to do it. And I sense things quite often, and I could sense them getting a little bit and I've had letters sent to the doctor saying that I wasn't complying and all that sort of thing. And it was a little bit.
Complying.
I've had that happen twice.
That
Many years ago.
That sends a bit of a shiver down my spine, not complying.
I know, that's what, like, they didn't say that, so to speak, but it implied that. And I was like, I just didn't understand what you were asking of me. That was what it was. And I couldn't tell it because I couldn't verbalize it because I was very overwhelmed.
Yes. So it's a bit like asking someone to name a musical instrument when you have no clue what that is.
Yeah, it is. And that is like a massive barrier. Also, like communication problems. A lot of therapy, when they're talking, sometimes they might say an implied sentence. They might imply something, or they might say a sentence that has a double meaning. That could mean something else. And I'm never quite sure what that means. And that is like, I'm just lost in the confusion in my head. And it puts another barrier up, and I'm like, oh. And then there's also, it's the silence as well. I spoke to somebody else about this because I've spoken to a couple of people, by quite a few actually, 20 odd people, and I actually agreed with it. Like, I was really surprised, and I didn't realise I started studying as well. The use of silence, right? It just turns into an awkward silence, because I think it would help if at the beginning of the session you'd explain what is entailed. So if you're in-person centred therapy, you say, right, throughout this, we may ask you certain questions. This is why we're asking you these questions, to get a better understanding. We might be silent for a bit. It's for you to process and to reflect and think about things. But nobody ever said that to me. You just sit there silent. And like a couple of other people said this as well, and he just felt really awkward and panicked, and he thought they were getting something wrong. And again, it was just like a big barrier, and it was really, really overwhelming. Definitely.
Yeah. So we've found out what's unhelpful. What is helpful? What can a counsellor do that may be helpful?
I would say, definitely for me, I couldn't stress enough. The first few sessions, build up a rapport, like get to know about their autism as well, and about how it affects them, what their needs are. So like if it did come to crisis point, what would they want them to do? Like get to know what makes them tick as well, because for instance, they might not be able to communicate verbally very well, but they may be able to draw. And you may have to just bend that therapy session around their communication a bit more. And I've had that where I've actually had a therapist who's like sat with me and stuff, and she knew I'd like to draw, so she showed us these like different things that I could draw and things. So like I coloured in and stuff, and then I had a bit of an interest in mindfulness myself, and we'd take like 10 minutes out of my session to like keep me, because I talk about a lot of things that we really struggled with, and she'd learned to know me and learned to see that I was getting to a state, and then we'd have our time that we'd already pre-planned that we were going to do that, and we'd sit down and do that, and that was really, really helpful. It molded it around my needs more, and she got to know me for who I was, for everything I was into, and she just took that time, and I was really grateful for that. And I got extra sessions as well because she took a bit longer to get to know me, and it made a hell of a lot of difference.
Yeah, it seems from what I'm hearing is that being known is really, really important for you. And for people to understand. And I picked up that right at the end of the session, your therapist had a kind of decompression session where you could decompress at the end. There was this space where you could bring yourself back to the here and now and be a calm. Is that the word?
Yeah, I would say that, because I would hate, like, if you just think about it, when you're autistic, you're talking about really disturbing things, and then you've got sensory issues as well and things like that, and then you walk out that therapy room into the street, and there's all this noise and there's all this stuff going on in your head, and it's not good.
No,
and you can't even find my way home sometimes.
It's a total overload, a real total overload.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is quite a long question. What did you need from the therapist to support you effectively that may be different from a standard therapeutic relationship? How might I recognise they were approaching a state of crisis, and what might counteract or counterbalance that in a positive way? So there's a few questions there. So I guess the first one is, what do they need? What would you need from the therapist? You've answered that a little bit, but it may be worth just expanding on it.
Yeah, I would say definitely, like I say, like a more of an integrative approach, like molding around that individual. Things like if it a bit out of the standard range, but like I say, like maybe it's the use of a whiteboard somewhere, because if you're becoming a certain way or you can't explain something, they might be able to draw it, or they might be interested in writing. And then I would because I am myself, and I started journaling, and that has helped me like understand my feelings better. And I've read over them, and I'm like, oh, now I know what that feeling was relating to my body, to my head, and I know what it is. And it gives great insight on things. And just definitely, and again, the report, I can't stress enough, the first few sessions, definitely, it just builds a strength, a foundation, a strong foundation for moving forward. Maybe it's also an understanding that sometimes with our comorbidities, that we may need extra things bringing in with us, because like some of us have like sensory processory disorders, and we may be like hyper or hyposensitive, and when you become in a certain emotional state, we may need to be compressed. So if it's okay if we bring like a blanket in, or even if there's any sort of like stimming equipment, like once you become you can notice in a person once they're starting to become a little bit distressed, they fidget more, a voice will change, or be like, could come across as even slightly aggressive. It's just always good to remember that like they don't mean it, and try not to mirror their voice back, stay calm. And it's like when you stay calm and like they would like have that time out just to calm down with a stimming toy or something like that. Like there's 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. We'll calm down, stop talking as much, and just relax. And we'll just, there's too many words when you're in a state, or when you are talking about something too sensitive, can cause a lot of distress and too much damage, and it can put them off going back. It put me off several times.
Yeah. So that answers that question nicely. The idea that that they might have to fit the therapy around you and be more integrative. That by maybe fidgeting or stimming, which is the movement of arms, or even appearing aggressive, that could be a state of crisis. And just to give that time out, that space. You mentioned the mindfulness at the beginning that your therapist put in at the end. That may be very useful to counterbalance what's going on for you, or to alleviate. It's
definitely something to cover with the individual, because I know some people on the autistic spectrum, it's a bit like Marmite mindfulness for autistic people. They either love it or they hate it, right? I'm personally a lover, but you'll always find something that they love to do to calm down, whether it's playing with some Lego, doing a little puzzle before they leave.
Yeah.
It would be a brilliant come down if something like that could be put in place, definitely, because I found it extremely helpful to get on with my day without worrying the rest of the day about everything that's been said and all the million things going through my head.
Sure. Yeah, so use the puzzle or something that was in your frame of reference that you would find able to reconnect with yourself, I guess, is what you're saying. Yeah. So the next question is, what counselling approach worked best for you? I guess we've answered the other side of it. What did their counsellor do or not do that was helpful to them? But which approach, you talked about CBT and person-centred. Which approach worked for you, do you think?
I've had a few.
All right.
I've had quite a few different approaches. I've even had a touch of DBT through emotional regulation courses.
Yes.
Now, not one completely worked for me. I always took bits out of each one which had helped me.
Right.
So, like, for instance, the DBT, I found it really helpful on the interpersonal relationships front.
Yes.
It helped me like be able to communicate and build friendships and understand the communication between friends and between them and what it was all about. That it was great, but it was paperwork heavy and homework heavy. And I've spoke to so many other autistic people as well as me, And we all kind of agree the homework part of it, you're bringing extreme anxiety home, and it's so anxiety provoking, worrying about whether this homework's going to be done, is it going to get in, is it going to be right, is it going to be wrong, what am I actually doing? And for me personally, I would love it to just stay in the therapy room, all the thing, but definitely, and person-centered, I do absolutely love it, especially now since I've got more of an understanding through studying it, of course. But it's nice to feel like not judged, because you spend a lot of time autistic people looking at you. You don't get that in that room, and it's important to have a little piece of that in your life at some point, I think, because it's unbelievable. It is really nice to get that feeling.
To be accepted as you.
I definitely would kind of say one thing though. I think it's like important that like people kind of do try and make that little bit of effort through personal development courses to try and get a little bit of understanding around autism, because at the moment it stands at 1 in 100 people are autistic, so it's quite a large number.
Yeah, it's it is. It's if you think of a shopping centre or a college, that's quite a number of people, isn't it?
Yeah.
The final question is, how many sessions did you have, and how did you find the beginning and the ends of it, and did it become a routine?
I've had sessions of 8, 10 and 12 of different sorts of therapies. I've had a couple extended as well. Beginnings I found a bit of a blur and overwhelming, because it was obviously it's anxiety provoking anyway, you're going to have to talk about your feelings in this environment. And quite often I got dropped the big bomb of like, so how does that make you feel? And I'm like thinking in my head, I don't even know my own feelings. Like, it's to me that is like a barrier straight away, because nobody tried to get to know me sometimes, and it was just like, I don't know what. So autistic people tend to have scripted responses. I don't know if you're aware of this.
Yes.
But yeah, I just kind of, I'm fine, I was okay. And yeah, the beginnings quite often was hard, although I did have that one experience with that lady who did take that time out, and it was amazing. The endings thing, it is a bit of a struggle, because you get used to it, and it becomes part of your routine and becomes part of your planning. Personally, I like speaking to some others, and myself personally think it would be good to like address it at the very beginning, and then each session just be like, this is our first session out of 8. Next session, this is our second session with 7 more to go, and things like that. Just so there's a bit of a countdown. You can prepare yourself better for the inevitable end of it, and it's not going to be such a like an impact. And you come home and you're like, you just get used to it once you're in there, and then all of a sudden you're gone. And yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and there's an ending to this question. Was there anything that a counsellor did in the room setting that made you feel comfortable or uncomfortable? So that's a question, I guess, about the room, the structure of the room, how it was lit, maybe.
The rooms, definitely, for me personally, natural lighting in a room, no fluorescent lighting. Obviously, a lot of people have sensory processory disorder who are autistic, and they can find it quite overwhelming. I have epilepsy on top of that, so it's a big no-no for me. I've had a lot of rooms I've gone into have had that, but they don't mind switching the light out. But sometimes I just don't have the confidence to ask, and that's something to be aware of. If you know you get an autistic client, they might not be able to cope with lighting. The seating, I quite often feel vulnerable on a chair. I feel like I'm this person in the middle of a room on my own on this chair. I always found it more comfortable being on a soft seat or a couch. So I could touch it as well. If I'm feeling anxious, I touch the softness on the seat, and it can calm me down. Or there's a cushion that's soft, and related things like that. I've been in one room that actually had a salt lamp in, and I found that quite therapeutic. That was different. Different, yes, I really like that. Uncomfortable. I think for me, if there's busy wallpaper or anything like that, or if there's also a student in, because what happens quite often is I've gone for counselling and I've arrived and they've come out and they went, oh, do you mind if this student sits in? And because I don't want to upset anyone, I say yes, but really I do mind. And if any of that sort of thing was going to take place, it would have to be like, I'd have to be wrote to first and told the date it was going to happen and things like that. Stuff like that is like a big no-no for me personally. It's very anxiety provoking. But a majority of the rooms I have been in have been quite relaxing. Yes. So I think,
So you'd have to, anything that's a change, you'd have to be prepared for.
Definitely. Change is really, really hard to cope with. Definitely.
I've got a final question, and it's actually not one that we agreed, but but I hope all it is, if you were sat in front of a group of student counsellors, what advice would you give them working with a person who may be on the autistic spectrum? What would you want them to go away knowing?
Oh, well, personally, I'd say it's important to learn about them as an individual. Yes, the autistic, learn about their needs around the autism, but them as well, what they're interested in. Spend that extra time just to really connect. Do your research, do a little level 2 course if you've got nothing, do anything you can do to raise your own awareness, to help you relate. And don't ever say you've watched something on the telly about someone with autism and go down that route, because it's a bit of a barrier and it's not a very good thing to say. just that little drop one in there. But it has happened a couple of times and it's been like, oh, please don't. But yeah, definitely just get to know your client. We are people. We are people just like you. We wire differently. That's all it is. Yes. And just remember that we don't understand our feelings. We can't name them very well. And it definitely work on feelings for the first few sessions. Identify them in whatever way their communication method is. So if they want to draw their feelings, or emotion cards, that's a good one. If you have emotion cards on hand, bring them in. They might be able to like kind of connect with them. Anything like that, because once you've gotten that rapport, you've gotten to help them understand their emotions better, then you can delve in and really connect.
Yeah, and for those people who don't know what emotion cards are, they're usually faces, aren't they, on a card?
Yeah, you can get all different ones now, yeah.
Yeah, I have a set here. And it's really useful because some people can say, that's me. I don't know I can't give it a name, but that's the face.
Yeah, they're valuable pieces of information.
Well, I think this whole interview has been valuable, and
thank you.
I'm sure that people are going to go away informed. What I'm going to take away, my big takeaway, is that I'm just reminded yet again how important the relationship is in counselling, and it seems that if you're working with someone who is autistic, it is really a case of making the effort to get to know someone and who they are in all of the aspects of them before you could actually get into any work. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Angela Maughan, to Rory Lees-Oakes. What an informative dive into the subject of autism. If anything came from that, Rory, it is how diverse we all are as individuals.
I know, neurodiversity is a word that's been getting a lot of traction and currency now, certainly in the counselling world. And just to hear Angela's observations from her own experience, just absolutely so valuable. And I particularly like the idea of allowing space at the end of the session for someone to kind of reform themselves and to become kind of mindful of where they're at. It's just so important. So I learned so much. I can't believe how much I learned in just a small interview, but we're really grateful. And we hope that you get a lot out of that. It's really interesting.
Indeed. And of course, we've got show notes for this, and Rory has created a little handout that you can get, and that's free of charge. You just need to go to counsellingtutor.com. That is our mother website. Click on the podcasts tab. You're going to need to kind of scroll through a bit to find our special editions, but you'll find it in the kind of 90s. Go to the 90s area if you're listening to this far in the future. You're going to see it there, and you can click on that and you can download Rory's super duper handout. Alternatively, just pop into the Counselling Study Resource. If you're a paid member of the Counselling Study Resource, that handout and indeed the lecture has been uploaded for you. So that is available for you now.
Yeah, and as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.